October 1943. North American Aviation Flight Test Facility, Inglewood, California. Bob Chilton sits strapped into the cockpit of NA-73X, prototype number 41-37352, a P-51 Mustang, that 3 separate test pilots have already refused to fly. The aircraft killed 2 men in the past 6 weeks. Contract cancellation papers sit on the desk of Army Air Forces Procurement Chief Major General Oliver Eccles in Washington. One more fatal incident, and America's most promising long-range escort fighter dies with this prototype. The problem isn't the airframe. The Mustang's laminar flow wing gives it a top speed of 440 miles per hour, at 30,000 feet, 50 miles per hour faster than any German fighter. The problem isn't the new Packard-built Merlin VE 1650 engine that North Americans squeezed into the nose after the original Allison power plant proved inadequate above 15,000 feet. The problem is that the P-51B wants to kill its pilot in high-speed dives, at 500 miles per hour, indicated airspeed, when pursuing German fighters fleeing into diving attacks. The Mustang's elevator controls lock solid. The stick becomes an immovable steel rod. Pull with all your strength, and the aircraft continues its terminal plunge toward the ground. 2 test pilots had discovered this characteristic at 8,000 feet. Neither had enough altitude to recover. The funeral services were held on consecutive Thursdays. Bob Chilton knows all of this as he advances the throttle and feels 1,695 horsepower surge through the airframe. At 31 years old, the former barnstormer and air racer has logged more than 4,000 hours testing experimental aircraft for North American aviation. He's survived 3 emergency bailouts, 2 forced landings with dead engines, and 1 mid-air structural failure that should have killed him over the Mojave Desert. What makes Chilton different isn't fearlessness. Fear keeps test pilots alive. What makes him different is his ability to think through panic, to analyze problems while the ground rushes up at terminal velocity. The stakes extend far beyond one experimental fighter. In Europe, American B-17 and B-24 bombers are being slaughtered by Luftwaffe interceptors. Without long-range escort fighters that can accompany bombers deep into Germany, the entire strategic bombing campaign teeters on the edge of failure. The P-38 Lightning has the range but lacks maneuverability. The P-47 Thunderbolt can fight but can't fly far enough. The P-51 Mustang has both range and performance, but only if someone can solve the high-speed dive problem before the Army cancels the entire program. Chilton climbs to 35,000 feet over the Mojave Desert, oxygen mask tight against his face, eyes scanning the instrument panel with methodical precision. Airspeed 220 miles per hour, altitude holding steady, engine temperatures normal. He rolls the Mustang inverted and pulls the nose down toward the brown earth 7 miles below. The dive begins gently, 250 miles per hour, 280, 300. The engine note rises to a scream as the propeller windmills faster, 350 miles per hour, 400. The airframe begins to buffet, small vibrations that telegraph through the control stick into Chilton's gloved hands. This is where the previous test pilots started fighting the aircraft, trying to force the stick back through sheer muscle against aerodynamic forces they didn't understand. 450 miles per hour. The buffeting increases. The stick grows heavy in his hands, requiring both arms to make small adjustments. 475 miles per hour. The controls are solidifying like concrete setting in the sun. This is the edge of the envelope, the boundary between controlled flight and catastrophic failure. 500 miles per hour, indicated airspeed. The stick locks completely. Chilton pulls with both hands, legs braced against the rudder pedals for leverage. Nothing. The elevator is frozen by airflow forces that exceed anything the hydraulic boost system can overcome. The altimeter unwinds like a clock running backward. 28,000 feet, 25,000, 22,000. Standard test pilot procedure says to bail out now. Pop the canopy, roll inverted, drop free, pull the ripcord, and live to file a report. Except that bailing out means the P-51 program dies, means American bomber crews continue dying over Germany at unsustainable rates, means the Luftwaffe maintains air superiority, while German factories keep producing tanks and aircraft. 20,000 feet. Chilton's mind races through aerodynamic principles while his hands remain locked on the immovable stick. Compressibility. The phenomenon occurs when aircraft approach the speed of sound and local airflow over control surfaces reaches transonic speeds. The air molecules can't move out of the way fast enough. They pile up, creating shock waves that change pressure distribution and render control surfaces ineffective. But here's what the aerodynamics textbooks don't explain clearly. What you can only learn by staying in a dying aircraft when every survival instinct screams to abandon ship. If the problem is airflow over the elevator, maybe the solution isn't the elevator at all. 18,000 feet. Chilton's left hand releases the stick and moves to the trim wheel. The elevator trim tab, a small hinged surface on the trailing edge of the main elevator, is designed for minor adjustments in level flight. It's not supposed to be a primary control during high-speed emergencies. Using it this way violates every operational procedure in the pilot's manual. He rotates the trim wheel backward, nose-up trim. The small trim tab deflects upward into the airflow. The forces acting on this tiny surface, maybe 8 inches tall and 12 inches wide, are minuscule compared to the forces pinning the main elevator in place. But the trim tab changes the aerodynamic pressure distribution just enough to rotate the entire elevator assembly, a fraction of a degree. 1 degree of elevator deflection at 500 miles per hour generates tremendous force. The Mustang's nose rises slightly, not much, maybe 5 degrees, but enough to begin bleeding off airspeed. 490 miles per hour, 480. As the aircraft slows, the shock waves weakening their grip on the control surfaces, the stick begins to move, just fractionally at first, maybe a quarter inch of travel. 15,000 feet. Chilton continues rolling in nose-up trim, while simultaneously pulling on the stick with both hands. The Mustang's nose rises higher, 450 miles per hour. The buffeting decreases as the aircraft transitions back below critical Mach numbers, 420 miles per hour. The stick moves freely again, responsive to control inputs like a well-trained horse responding to the reins. 12,000 feet. The dive is broken. Chilton levels off, breathing hard inside his oxygen mask, gloved hands trembling slightly on the controls. The ground that was rushing up to kill him now sits at a comfortable distance below. He has discovered something that will change aerial combat forever. The P-51 Mustang can recover from terminal velocity dives, using elevator trim alone. But discovering a solution is different from proving it works reliably. Different from developing procedures that average combat pilots can execute under the stress of aerial combat over Germany. Chilton climbs back to 35,000 feet. He repeats the dive. Same speeds, same control lockup, same trim wheel recovery technique. The numbers are consistent. At 500 miles per hour indicated airspeed, the stick locks at approximately 19,000 feet during the recovery. Roll in nose-up trim continuously until the stick begins moving again at approximately 15,000 feet, then pull firmly to complete the recovery by 10,000 feet. Margin for error, 4,000 feet, approximately 15 seconds at terminal velocity. Over the next 6 days, Chilton performs 47 high-speed dives, refining the technique, measuring the forces, documenting the procedures. His test reports are methodical, precise, filled with the kind of data that engineers and procurement officers trust. But the real breakthrough comes when he writes the operational procedures for combat pilots. If you enter a high-speed dive exceeding 500 miles per hour indicated airspeed, and the elevator controls become unresponsive, his report states, do not bail out immediately. Roll in full nose-up elevator trim continuously, while maintaining firm back pressure on the control stick. The aircraft will begin recovery between 15,000 and 12,000 feet. Continue pulling as control authority returns. Do not attempt to accelerate the recovery by adding power or rolling into a turn, as this will increase structural loading beyond design limits. The implications ripple through the Army Air Forces like shockwaves from a propeller blade. The P-51B isn't a death trap that needs to be scrapped. It's a world-class fighter that requires specific handling techniques during extreme maneuvers. The difference between those two conclusions is the difference between cancelling the program and producing 15,000 aircraft. But Chilton's report lands on skeptical desks. At Wright Field, the Army's test pilot establishment views the entire episode with suspicion. Major Fred Borsodi, chief of the fighter test section, voices the concerns that echo through military aviation circles. Chilton got lucky, Borsodi tells colleagues over lunch in the Wright Field Officers Club. He found one specific technique that worked one specific time. That doesn't mean the average fighter pilot in combat conditions can replicate it. We need fighters that don't require experimental test pilot skills just to keep them flying. The counter-argument comes from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding officer of the 4th Fighter Group, arrives at Wright Field, fresh from England, where his P-47 Thunderbolt pilots are learning the brutal mathematics of escort missions. The Thunderbolts can fight German interceptors on equal terms, but they can't fly deep enough into Germany to protect bombers hitting Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr Valley industrial targets. Blakesley reviews Chilton's test reports with the cold pragmatism of an officer who has written too many letters to the families of dead pilots. You're telling me Chilton's procedure requires 4,000 feet to recover from a terminal velocity dive? He asks the Wright Field engineers. My pilots are mixing it up with 109s and 190s at altitudes between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. 4,000 feet margin is plenty. I'll teach every pilot in my group to use the trim wheel recovery before they fly their first mission. The decision point arrives in November 1943, when General Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, demands a final demonstration. If the P-51B can be proven safe in the hands of average combat pilots, not just experimental test pilots, production can proceed. If not, the entire program shuts down, and the Army commits resources to improving the P-47's range instead. Wright Field selects 6 fighter pilots for the evaluation. All are combat veterans recently rotated back from Europe. None have experimental test pilot training. None have more than 10 hours in the P-51B. They receive 4 hours of classroom instruction on compressibility effects and trim wheel recovery procedures, then launch on supervised high-speed dive tests over the Ohio countryside. All 6 pilots successfully recover from terminal velocity dives, using Chilton's technique. The margin for error proves larger than calculated. Even pilots who react slowly or apply the procedure imperfectly manage to recover with altitude to spare. The trim wheel technique works because it's simple, requiring only one action: rotate the trim wheel backward, that combat pilots can execute even under extreme stress. General Arnold receives the test results by telegram on November 19, 1943. All evaluation pilots successfully recovered from high-speed dives, using prescribed procedures. Recommend immediate approval for P-51B, full production, and deployment to European theater. The production order goes out the same day. North American Aviation's Inglewood facility will build 1,988 P-51B models. The Dallas plant will produce another 1,750 P-51Cs, which are identical except for manufacturing location. More importantly, every P-51 pilot manual will include detailed procedures for high-speed dive recovery, written in language simple enough that a 19-year-old farm kid from Iowa can execute them perfectly, while German tracers stream past his canopy. The combat results validate everything. By March 1944, P-51 Mustangs are escorting bomber formations to Berlin and back, a 200-mile round trip that no other fighter can accomplish. In dogfights with German interceptors, Mustang pilots routinely use high-speed dives as an escape maneuver, deliberately accelerating to 500 miles per hour, knowing they can recover using the trim wheel technique, while pursuing German fighters either back off or risk compressibility problems in their own aircraft. The kill ratios tell the story. P-51 units achieve loss rates of 2-to-1 against German fighters, meaning for every Mustang shot down, 2 German aircraft are destroyed. More critically, bomber losses drop from unsustainable 10% per mission rates to manageable 3% as Mustang escorts accompany formations throughout entire missions. By war's end, P-51 Mustangs have destroyed 4,950 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, and another 4,131 on the ground. The aircraft that 3 test pilots refused to fly, the fighter program that came within days of cancellation, becomes the dominant long-range escort fighter of World War II. But the broader impact extends beyond combat statistics. Chilton's discovery that trim tabs can recover aircraft from control lockup influences the entire next generation of high-speed aircraft design. When Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier in the Bell X-1 4 years later, his aircraft includes an all-moving horizontal stabilizer, specifically because engineers remember the lessons learned from the P-51's compressibility problems. Modern fighter jets still use the principles Chilton discovered over the Mojave Desert in October 1943. When an F-22 Raptor pilot encounters control problems at transonic speeds, the flight control computers automatically adjust trim surfaces before the pilot even realizes there's a problem. The software is sophisticated, but the fundamental aerodynamic principle, using small surfaces to influence larger control surfaces when primary controls become ineffective, traces directly back to one test pilot's decision to keep flying when everyone else would have bailed out. Bob Chilton continued testing experimental aircraft for North American aviation throughout the war and into the jet age. He survived 11 more emergency situations that would have killed less skilled pilots. He never received a medal for the October 1943 test flight that saved the P-51 program, because test pilots don't get medals for doing their jobs, even when their jobs involve calculated decisions to stay with dying aircraft. He died in 1986 at age 74, having logged more than 12,000 flight hours in 347 different aircraft types. His obituary in Aviation Week mentioned his work on the P-51 Mustang in the 3rd paragraph, noting simply that his contributions to fighter aircraft development during World War II proved significant. The word barely captures the reality. Because of one test pilot's refusal to bail out, because of his ability to analyze aerodynamic problems while plunging toward the Earth at 500 miles per hour, because of his willingness to try an insane maneuver that violated every operational procedure, the P-51 Mustang survived to become the fighter that helped win the air war over Europe. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat, between historical footnote and legendary aircraft, comes down to 15 seconds of controlled terror over the Mojave Desert, and one pilot's certainty that the numbers would work if he just kept flying.